May 2011. Just after midnight, Dan Saunders stands inside a luxury hotel suite, staring through the window. Far below, red and blue lights flash across the street. His hands won't stop shaking. For months, he has been waiting for this moment. The moment someone finally comes to collect the debt. 4 months earlier, Dan was a broke bartender living in a small Australian town. He wasn't a hacker. He wasn't a banker. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was just another guy trying to make rent. Then one night, he found something impossible. An ATM that appeared to be broken. At first, it looked like a minor technical error, the kind of glitch most people would ignore. But Dan didn't walk away. He pressed a few more buttons, tried something he wasn't supposed to try, and suddenly, the machine handed him money he didn't have. Real money. Not once, not twice, every single time. What Dan had accidentally discovered wasn't just a banking error. It was a loophole that allowed him to create money out of thin air. Or at least, that's what it felt like. Over the next 5 months, he would spend more than $1.6 million. Private jets, luxury resorts, 5-star hotels, champagne that cost more than a family car. But the money wasn't really his. And deep down, he knew it. Because every night, as he spent thousands of dollars he never earned, a single question kept getting louder. If you found a way to get unlimited money, how long could you resist using it? May 2011, just after midnight. Dan Saunders stands inside a luxury hotel suite, staring through the window. Far below, red and blue lights flash across the street. His hands won't stop shaking. For months, he has been waiting for this moment. The moment someone finally comes to collect the debt. 4 months earlier, Dan was a broke bartender living in a small Australian town. He wasn't a hacker. He wasn't a banker. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was just another guy trying to make rent. Then one night, he found something impossible. An ATM that appeared to be broken. At first, it looked like a minor technical error, the kind of glitch most people would ignore. But Dan didn't walk away. He pressed a few more buttons, tried something he wasn't supposed to try. And suddenly, the machine handed him money he didn't have. Real money. Not once, not twice, every single time. What Dan had accidentally discovered wasn't just a banking error. It was a loophole that allowed him to create money out of thin air. Or at least, that's what it felt like. Over the next 5 months, he would spend more than $1.6 million. Private jets, luxury resorts, 5-star hotels, champagne that cost more than a family car. But the money wasn't really his. And deep down, he knew it. Because every night, as he spent thousands of dollars he never earned, a single question kept getting louder. If you found a way to get unlimited money, how long could you resist using it? The next night, Dan returned to the ATM. Not because he needed money, because he needed answers. All day, he had expected a phone call from the bank. A frozen account, a fraud alert, something. Instead, nothing happened. The cash was still in his wallet. The transaction was still there. And the world continued as if nothing unusual had happened. So shortly before 1 a.m., Dan stood in front of the machine again. This time, he paid closer attention. The same message appeared. Balance unavailable. The same strange behavior. The same delay. And once again, the ATM seemed unable to verify how much money he actually had. That's when Dan started seeing a pattern. Every night, between roughly 1 and 3 a.m., the banking system appeared to enter a temporary blind spot. The ATM could process requests, but it couldn't properly verify account balances in real time. At least, that was Dan's theory. There was only one way to test it. Push harder, much harder. He attempted a transfer that should have been impossible. Thousands of dollars moved from an account that didn't contain thousands of dollars. The machine accepted it. Dan then withdrew cash against that newly created balance. The machine accepted that too. His pulse exploded. This wasn't luck. It wasn't random. The glitch was repeatable. For the first time, Dan realized he might be holding something incredibly dangerous. A system that could be manipulated. A loophole hiding inside one of the country's largest banks. And once he understood the pattern, he developed a strategy. Every night, he would create a larger fake balance. then use that fake balance to cover the previous day's negative balance, like stacking one illusion on top of another. A financial house of cards. As long as he kept moving forward, the collapse never arrived. At first, the numbers were small, a few $1,000s, then $10,000, then $20,000, then $50,000. Every successful transaction made the next one easier, and every night that passed without consequences made him more confident, maybe too confident. Because what started as curiosity was becoming something else, something far more dangerous. Dan was no longer testing the glitch. He was starting to trust it, and that trust was about to make him a millionaire. If you found an ATM that kept giving you money the bank didn't know existed, would you report it? Or would you convince yourself that one more withdrawal couldn't hurt? A few weeks later, Dan walked into a bank branch expecting trouble. Instead, he received something far more dangerous: validation. He approached the counter casually, trying not to attract attention. By this point, he had already withdrawn tens of thousands of dollars through the glitch. Every transaction felt impossible. Every night felt like borrowed time. Surely someone inside the bank had noticed. Surely some alarm had gone off. Surely somebody was watching. But when the teller pulled up his account, nothing happened. No security officer appeared. No questions were asked. No account freeze. No accusations. The teller simply looked at the screen and continued the conversation. Dan glanced at the balance and nearly froze. The number staring back at him was over $1 million. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. $1 million. Not in a movie, not in a fantasy, not in someone else's account. His, at least on paper. Walking out of the branch, Dan felt something he had never experienced before. Power. Not the power that comes from strength, or intelligence, or status. The power that comes from believing the rules no longer apply to you. For most of his life, money had been a limitation. It determined where he lived, what he could buy, who paid attention to him. Now, suddenly, those limits seemed gone. Every problem looked solvable. Every dream looked affordable. And perhaps most importantly, every risk looked smaller than it really was. The glitch had become more than a source of money. It had become proof that he could outsmart the system. At first, Dan told himself he would be responsible, pay off some debts, take care of a few problems, then stop. But that's not what happened. Because the moment he saw 7 figures attached to his name, something changed. The withdrawals became easier, the justifications became stronger, and the voice telling him to quit became quieter. After all, the bank still hadn't called. The police still hadn't appeared. The system still hadn't noticed. Or at least, that's what Dan believed. And that belief was about to send him on the most expensive 5-month adventure of his life. At first, Dan spent the money the way most people imagine they would. Paying bills, helping friends, buying things he had always wanted. But something strange happened. The more money he spent, the less the money itself mattered. What mattered was how people reacted to it. For the first time in his life, doors opened before he reached them. People listened more carefully. Waiters smiled more warmly. Strangers treated him differently. Money wasn't just buying things. It was changing the way the world responded to him. And Dan quickly became addicted to that feeling. Soon, the spending escalated. A weekend getaway turned into a luxury vacation. A luxury vacation turned into a private jet. A private jet turned into an entirely different lifestyle. One day he was pouring drinks behind a bar. The next, he was flying to Bali, staying in beachfront villas and ordering room service that cost more than his weekly paycheck used to be. When people asked where the money came from, he had answers ready. Crypto, investments, business deals, anything but the truth. And surprisingly, people believed him. Because once someone appears wealthy, most people stop asking questions. They start making assumptions. Dan discovered something else too. Giving money away felt almost as good as spending it. A friend struggling with university tuition? Problem solved. Another friend drowning in debt? Gone. Someone mentioned a financial problem in passing? Dan would sometimes fix it before the conversation ended. The gratitude was intoxicating. People looked at him differently. Not as a bartender. Not as an ordinary guy, but as someone important. Someone successful. Someone powerful. And that feeling became harder to walk away from than the money itself. Soon, he wasn't spending because he needed anything. He was spending because he loved the reaction, the admiration, the attention, the status, the version of himself that money seemed to create. Years later, Dan would admit something surprising. He wasn't addicted to the cash. He was addicted to what the cash did to people. Because unlimited money doesn't just buy luxury, it buys influence. And influence can be more addictive than any drug. But while everyone around Dan saw a man living his best life, something very different was happening behind the scenes. The more extravagant his life became, the harder it became to ignore a terrifying reality. None of it was actually his. And eventually, every illusion reaches the point where it starts to crack. By the end of 2011, Dan was living two completely different lives. During the day, he looked like a man who had won the lottery. At night, he looked like a man waiting to be arrested. The transformation happened slowly. At first, the glitch felt exciting. Then, it felt empowering. Eventually, it became exhausting. Every morning began with the same ritual. Dan would wake up, grab his phone, and search his own name online. Just in case. Just in case a newspaper had published a story. Just in case police had announced an investigation. Just in case the bank had finally figured it out. Every day, the search returned nothing. No headlines, no warrants, no arrests. And somehow, that made things worse. Because uncertainty can be more terrifying than consequences. At least prison had a date, a beginning, an end. This was different. This was living inside a countdown clock without knowing when it would reach zero. The anxiety started showing physically. His hands shook. He struggled to sleep. His heart raced at random moments. Every unexpected phone call felt like a threat. Every knock at the door felt like the beginning of the end. The irony was almost unbelievable. Dan had everything he thought he wanted. Money, freedom, luxury, attention. Yet he had never felt less free. One night, the pressure finally followed him into a bar. He was sitting with friends, spending money the way he always did. Drinks, food, another expensive evening. Then, one of his closest friends grabbed his wrist. The conversation that followed would stay with Dan for years. His friend leaned forward. "I know what you're doing." The words hit harder than any police interrogation could have. For a second, Dan couldn't breathe. His mind immediately jumped to the worst possibility. The bank had found out. The police were investigating. Someone had talked. But his friend wasn't a detective. He was simply someone who had been paying attention. He had seen the late-night ATM visits, the sudden wealth, the impossible lifestyle. The story didn't make sense. And for the first time, someone close to Dan said out loud what he had been trying not to hear himself. "This isn't going to end well." Then his friend stood up and walked away. Dan sat there staring at his drink. Because deep down, he knew his friend was right. The glitch had changed his life, but it had also trapped him. He couldn't go forward forever, and he couldn't go back. The more money he spent, the harder it became to stop. The bigger the lie became, the harder it became to explain. What started as a lucky discovery had evolved into a full-time secret. A secret that followed him everywhere. To every hotel, every flight, every party, every conversation. And perhaps the worst part was that the bank still hadn't stopped him. Occasionally, fraud investigators would call, but not to question where the money came from, only to confirm his purchases. "Did you spend $8,000 at this hotel?" "Yes." "Perfect, just checking." The calls felt surreal. The institution he feared most seemed completely blind. But Dan wasn't blind. He could see exactly where this road ended. The only thing he didn't know was when. And after months of running, spending, and pretending, he finally reached a conclusion. The police weren't the biggest threat anymore. The glitch wasn't the biggest threat. The biggest threat was himself. Because for the first time since discovering the exploit, Dan no longer feared getting caught. He feared what would happen if he never got caught at all. In June 2011, Dan finally did something that surprised everyone. He stopped. Not because the bank caught him. Not because the police showed up. Not because the glitch stopped working. He stopped because he couldn't live with it anymore. For months, he had been outrunning consequences, building bigger balances, spending larger amounts, creating a life that looked perfect from the outside. But behind the luxury hotels and private flights was a man who could barely sleep. A man constantly waiting for disaster. So one night, Dan skipped the routine. No phantom transfers, no balancing tricks, no attempt to hide the truth. He simply let the system correct itself. The result was immediate. The illusion collapsed. Millions of dollars in negative balances suddenly appeared. The fantasy was over. The next morning, Dan called the bank. His voice shook as he tried to explain what had happened. He wanted to return what remained, confess, end the nightmare. But the response was short. "It's a police matter now." Then the conversation ended. Dan waited. One day, 1 week, 1 month, nothing. No arrest, no charges, no knock at the door. The silence continued for nearly 2 years. Eventually, unable to live in uncertainty any longer, Dan did something unexpected. He told his story publicly. The bartender who had discovered a banking glitch, the man who had accidentally created a fortune. The story exploded across Australia. And finally, the authorities acted. Dan was charged. He pleaded guilty. He accepted responsibility. And after years of anxiety, the waiting was finally over. The court sentenced him to prison. The punishment was real. But so was the relief, because for the first time in years, the uncertainty had ended. Today, Dan's story isn't remembered because of the glitch. It's remembered because of what happened after. Most people believe unlimited money would solve their problems. Dan discovered the opposite. The money gave him freedom. Then, it took it away. It gave him confidence. Then it replaced that confidence with fear. And perhaps that's the strangest part of all. The ATM glitch didn't reveal a weakness in the banking system. It revealed a weakness in human nature. Because the moment Dan stopped believing the rules applied to him, he started becoming someone he barely recognized. The glitch gave him unlimited money, but it also taught him a lesson that cost far more than $1.6 million. Just because you can take something doesn't mean you'll be able to live with it afterward.